All right, so now that we've learned how to graph the parabola, we're now going to look at finding the vertex, focus, and directrix of a parabola, as well as me giving you the information and you writing the equation of the parabola. So in the first example here, it says find the vertex, focus, and directrix of each parabola. Well, if I look here, this looks nothing like the form that we are given. So we have to, complete the square. Okay, so remember back in chapter 9 when we completed the square, we're completing the square again. So I'm going to start by moving the 4x and the 25 to the other side. So that gives us y squared minus 10y. And then we're going to have our empty spot equals negative 4x minus 25. Now, the reason I chose to keep the y squared on the left and move the others to the right is because we always like to have the squared on the left-hand side and then the normal variable on the right. You don't have to, it's just how our equation was written at the beginning of the chapter, so it just makes sense in our brain if we keep that same format. Now remember, to figure out what goes in our blank, we have to take our b term, divide by 2, and square it. Now, Ms. Peck forgot. If I'm going to add something to this side, I have to add it to this side, otherwise our equation isn't equal. So anyways, I'm going to take 10, divide it by 2, and square it. So 10 divided by 2 gives us 5, and then 5 squared is 25. So I'm going to add 25 to each side. Now this is just a trinomial, so what multiplies to positive 25 and adds to negative 10 is negative 5 and negative 5. So y minus 5, or y minus 5 squared, right? If I told you to take this and multiply it out, you would get this trinomial. Equals negative 4x, well, negative 25 and 25 cancel out. So now that we have it in the right form, now I can find the vertex, focus, and directrix. Now, the vertex is going to come from our problem here. Well, there's no parenthesis with the x, which means our x value is 0. And then it's y minus 5, which would make our vertex positive 5. So I'm just going to draw a little picture here. This isn't part of, if this is on a test, you want to get points for this. I'm just a very visual person, so drawing this helps me. So I'm going to go to 0, positive 5, and I'm just going to make a little dot there. That just helps me visualize what's going on. Now, because this is a y squared function, it's going to be opening left or right, but because this is a negative 4x, it's not going to open to the right, it's going to open to the left. So I know my parabola is going to look something like this. I don't really care, it doesn't need to look pretty, that is the ugliest parabola I've seen, right? Doesn't need to be pretty, it just helps me visualize. So now I need to figure out what my a value is. So my a value, now it's going to be, you know, whatever, 4a to give us negative 4, right? Well, 4 times what is negative 4? Negative 1, right? A is negative 1. So I'm going to go out one direction in each way. So here's my focus. So if this is at 0, 5, then this is going to be at negative 1, 5. If this is at 0 and I went 1 unit this way, that's going to be at positive 1, so x equals positive 1. Okay, so this just kind of helps me visualize where my focus and the directrix would be so that I can figure this out. This isn't part of my answer by any means, it just helps me find these answers. Okay, so with problem B here, same thing. This time at least we don't have to complete the square. So I'm going to go ahead and find the vertex first. So the vertex, opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. Opposite of positive 1 is negative 1. So I know my vertex here is at positive 5, negative 1. Because this is an x squared and it's negative, it's going to be opening down. So I know that much at least. Now I need to figure out my a value. Well, this is really 1. That's like a negative 1. So I need to make this in terms of 4 times what gives me negative 1. So 4 times what gives me negative 1? Well, that would make a negative 1/4. So I'm going to move negative 1/4 in each direction. So a fourth. So if I'm here, my x value didn't change, but I went down 1/4. So for my focus, my x value didn't change, but I went down a fourth. And then for my directrix, it's going to be a y equals, and I went up a fourth, so that would be less negative. So instead of being at -1, now I'm at -3/4. Okay. All right, now in 6 and 7, instead of me giving you the equation and asking for the answers like we did in the top problems here, I'm giving you the information and I want you to write the equation. So it says find the equation of the parabola described. So we have a focus at 7, 0, and we have a vertex at 0, 0. So once again, I like to kind of draw a picture to help me figure out what's going on. So I'm at 0, 0, and the focus is at 7, 0. Well, if my focus is here, that tells me my parabola has to open to the right. So if it's opening to the right, that tells us we have a positive a value, and that also tells us that it's a y-squared graph. Now, because the vertex is at 0, 0, it's going to be in the form of y² equals 4ax. Okay, so really at this point, all I need to figure out is what's the a term. Well, the focus is always a away, so if this number is 7, then this distance here is 7, which means my a has to be 7. So I'm going to have y² equals 4 times 7 times x, which would give us y² equals 28x. Now it did tell us to find the 2 points described by the lattice rectum and draw the graph. So here's our graph. Now these 2 points is what they're asking for here. So remember, these points are 2a away. So if we said this is 7, then I need to go 14 away. So the x is the same, but I went up 14. The x is the same, but I went down 14. So there we go. So then B tells us we have a vertex at 0, 0 again. The axis of symmetry is on the y-axis, and we have a point at 5, 3. So if we drew a picture to help us, we are at 0, 0. It's going to be symmetric with the y-axis, which means it's going to open up or down, and then it contains the point 5, 3. So that tells us it's going to be opening up because it has to go through this point. Now we don't know that this is a lattice, right? It doesn't tell us that. If it told us that, then that would help us find the a value, but we don't know that that's true. So I know this is because it's opening up. It's going to be x² equals 4ay. We know that. But I don't know what the a term is. I can't assume that it's this point here at 5, 3. So instead what we're going to do is, well, isn't this an x and this is a y? So let's plug them in. So 5² equals 4a times 3. And now we can solve for a because we don't know what a is. So this is 25 equals 12a. So a is 25 over 12. So that means my equation is x² equals 4 times a times y, which would give us x² equals 4 times 25 is 100 over 12 would simplify to 25/3 y. So there's our equation. And then it wanted us to find these extra points here. So my a value is 25 over 12. So this is 25 over 12. And then I'd have to go this way and this way each way, right? So if I went double that, it would be double of 25 is 50, 50 twelfths would simplify to, sorry guys, my math skills today are a little lacking, 25 sixths. So this would be at the point 25 sixths, 25 twelfths, and then negative 25 sixths, 25 twelfths. Woo! Fractions. All right, why don't you guys see if you could figure out number 7 on your own? I think that'd be a really good one. So why don't you pause and see if you can problem solve. If not, I will do it right now, but I think it's a good exercise for you to try and problem solve through this. So number 7 says a parabola has a focus at -3, -2. So once again, I like to draw it to just give myself a visual. -3, -2, that's the focus. And it has a directrix at the line x equals 1. So at +1, here's our directrix. Well, that means my parabola is going to be in the middle here of those two things. So I need to figure out what's the vertex. Well, if this is at -3 and this is at +1, I need to know what's in the middle. So I need to figure out, well, what's in the middle of -3 and +1? So to figure out what's in the middle of those two, I could add and divide by 2. So that would give me -2 divided by 2, which would be -1. So this vertex here is going to have an x value of -1. And then it's going to have the same y value that our focus did. So it's going to be -1, -2 is this vertex. So because it's opening to the left, we know that that's a y squared. So y squared equals 4a times x. Our x value is -1, so in our parentheses it's going to be +1. Then our y value is -2, so it's going to be +2. Now I need to figure out my a value. Well, if this is at -1 and this is at -3, that makes this distance here 2, and this distance 2. So that makes our a value 2. But it's -2 because it's opening to the left. So our final answer here is y plus 2 squared equals -8 x plus 1. All right, last problem. We've got a word problem here. It says a searchlight is shaped like a parabola. The light source is located 2 feet from the base along the axis of symmetry and opening 10 feet across. How deep should the searchlight be? So we have a parabola. It's going to make our lives easier if we just focus our parabola on 0, 0 here. Now it's telling us the source light is 2 feet away. So that distance there is 2. And then the opening is 10 feet wide, right? So here's our searchlight. Now when we have searchlights, the light source is always the focus. So they design the light source to be at the focus area. So if we know this is where the light source is, then we know our a value is 2. So that tells us our a value is 2. And because it's opening up, it tells us our parabola is in this form. Now, if we know, once again, that this is 10 feet across and this is at 0, 0, then we can say each of these are at 5, which would make this point right here at 5, comma, I don't know how tall it is, right? Went to the right 5, I don't know how tall it is. Well, isn't that what I'm trying to figure out? It's wondering how deep it should be. And how deep it should be would be this whole distance, which would be this y value. So I need to figure out when a is 2, and this is my parabola, what is the y value at an x value of 5? So I'm going to plug in all that information. My x value is 5, the a value is 2, and I'm trying to find y. So in order for this to have a light source at 2 feet and be 10 feet across, we need to make the searchlight be 25 over 8 feet deep.